BDO is a Korean MMORPG made by Pearl Abyss that came out back in December of 2014 and still has a very healthy player base here in 2022. In today's video, I'm going to cover some information about Black Desert, my personal pros and cons list, and what type of player I think will and won't enjoy BDO. And my goal is that by the end of this video, you will know if BDO is a game that is worth giving your time to in 2022. Now, BDO, I will say, is a tough game to get into as a new player, especially if you're coming into it from a traditional Western MMO, and I know I started rolling out a ton of beginner guides here on my YouTube channel, and you expect even more in the upcoming months. So if you do decide by the end of this video that the game is right for you, be sure to drop a sub so that you can keep up to date with those beginner guides and get into the game with as little headaches as possible. Now, actually hopping into the About section here, Black Desert Online is a buy-to-play game with a microtransaction store, with packages starting as cheap as $10, but they do often do free giveaways for the game and have times that you can get into the game totally free. BDO has a high fantasy universe, and the game is completely sandboxed, so you can just do whatever you want whenever you want to do it. And because it is a sandbox, there's a lot of freedom, and it always feels like there's something to do. Black Desert Online also has action combat, but the game plays more like a fighting game compared to a traditional MMO, so that is going to be an adjustment for some people, but I will say that BDO has probably some of my favorite combat of any MMO I've ever played. BDO also does technically have no level cap, and progression in the game is nearly infinite. Now, you will hit soft caps, though, at about level 61 to 62, where the time to level up does get extremely high, but as long as you're doing something in game, you will gain experience, and you'll always be progressing your character in some way. And level is not nearly the most important fact towards your character's power level, but it is just something that you typically will get to 61 or 62, and at that point, any extra levels that you gain is just small amounts of progression. There are 24 different classes in the game, which are gender locked, and the way that the general class progression works, though, is that you'll start with a class's main skills, and when you hit level 56, you'll unlock your Awakening skill line, which does give you a secondary weapon and a whole new skill tree to place skill points in. However, if you really did enjoy your base skills and don't want to play with the new Awaken playstyle, you can choose to instead empower your base skills through the Succession skill tree. Now, BDO also has very in-depth crafting professions, which in this game are called life skills. All of the life skills in this game are very unique in their own way, and the way they're designed really gives them a very old-school MMO type of feel. The housing system in BDO is also a pretty deep system, although currently player housing is a bit more limited compared to other MMOs. There were some expansions done to the system with mansions in-game, and while the housing system overall is okay, I still do personally find housing in games like ESO and SWTOR to be superior. Now, you do have the ability, though, to purchase a ton of various houses in whatever city you want, and the houses can serve different purposes. You can use them to unlock additional bank storage, use them as a personal residence, which is when you can do all your customization, put crafting tables, and just furnish the house to your liking, or you can even turn them into workshops for your workers that you could hire to craft items in. Speaking of workers, BDO does have a worker system where you could have NPC workers gather resources for you like you play. This worker system and the node system that goes along with it has a bit of a mobile game to feel to it, where you have so much energy to spend per character to hire workers, which replenishes over time, and then you can have these workers get sent to nodes around the map to gather items for you or to craft items in a house. Speaking of nodes, a node is simply a place that you discover on the map that has a node manager. So for example, if I go to this node here that I'm hovering over on my map and speak to the node manager here, I can unlock the node on the map, invest contribution points into the node, which is the type of currency that you earn from doing in-game activities, and you can unlock the ability to send workers to that node, assuming I have another node connected to it from where the worker hub is. I can then spend energy to have the workers go to the node. So TLDR, you hire workers, you send them to places on the map that you've discovered to farm materials, and you need to spend basically types of currency to make these things happen. Now, it's a very abridged, simplified version of this system. I do have a beginner guide on my channel for it, though, if you want to learn it more in depth, because it is a very important system to the game. It does have a lot of complexity to it, but I just wanted to do a very brief overview here in the video, though, since it is a pretty big system in the game. Now, the game's PvE does consist primarily of mob grinding and world bosses. However, the game does have 2 dungeons at the moment that provide quite the PvE challenge for those who do want to undertake it. There's also another dungeon-like instance that's like a horde mode called called the Altar of Blood, but for the most part, PvE content in Black Desert is mostly mob grinding and world bosses. However, the mob grinding isn't always totally mindless. At these higher end spots that you get to, mobs will have mechanics, and failure to maintain certain buffs and debuffs can easily result in your death. Now, the game does have a ton of PvP options, such as node wars, which are basically hold and defend the point where you fight against other guilds, team deathmatch, open world PvP, guild v guild, and more. Do note though that the open world PvP is not opt-in, it is on all the time. Some areas are safe zones, but if you're in a combat zone, anyone can attack you. Now, this does not mean that players are just going to be able to farm you left and right. If a really high gear player attacks a less gear player, they lose this thing called karma, which if they lose enough karma, can make them attack on sight by guards in towns, and they have to stop attacking players and grind mobs to put them back in good standing. Also, there was a lot of guild politics behind World PvP, and shit can get started if one guild continually attacks another, so you really won't have to overly worry about getting harassed unless you're encroaching on someone else's grind spot. Also, new players, don't worry. When you are starting, you'll be able to access servers for a few weeks where World PvP is disabled to give you time to learn the game and progress your character. This game doesn't run off of a mega server system either, so if someone is deciding to be rude and just unprovokingly attacking you a lot, you can just freely change channels at any moment. It's kind of like a channel system, very similar to old school RuneScape. If you also never want to PvP, you can lock your character at level 49, since PvP in the game is not enabled for anybody below level 50. Perlibis also does have plans for a gear equalized arena called the Arena of Solaire, which will offer a much requested and heavily desired arena mode into the game that I know I personally am looking forward to very much, where I can just queue into arena and play and just PvP whenever I want. Black Desert is focused primarily on character progression. Since there is no traditional PvE, the main focus is on PvP, character progression via leveling, and gearing, and gold making via life skills or grinding mobs. The game also does have a very in-depth guild system. Guilds have a lot of meaning in Black Desert Online. You can declare war on other guilds. Members get paid for being in the guild based on agreed contracts between the guild member and the guild master. You could do guild quests, and one of the PvP modes, Castle Siege, allows you to fight for ownerships of towns. Guilds do take a lot more management in this game, though, due to the dues and contract systems, so look into it a little bit more if you are thinking about becoming a guild master. Now, in BDO, gear does not have a level, and instead has an attack power and defense power rating on the gear, as well as some other bonuses like accuracy, evasion, etc. This gear can be enhanced to increase the potency of the bonuses on this gear, and I do have a gear basics guide on my YouTube channel if you do want to learn it a little bit more. BDO also does have this system called season servers. Season servers can be basically thought of as like a fast-paced way to get your character started in Black Desert Online, and you actually end up leaving the season servers through a system called graduation, where you basically level up your character on the season server, do a bunch of tasks, and gain like a bunch of bonuses through like a battle pass kind of system. And when the season server is over, your character is in a very solid spot to basically start progressing into the mid-game stuff, where you can really begin gearing and start to do some more of the higher-end grind spots. It's a very, very good system that they've added to allow new players and returning players to get into the game much quicker, and I think it segues really well into the guaranteed pen system, which I will talk about in my pros list. Now, BDO also does have a central auction house. It does not have fast travel either. Thankfully, you do get a horse, though, from the main quest line, which could allow you to ride around quicker, and you could also buy a better horse on the horse market if you do talk to any stable master. BDO also does have a very in-depth pet system. Pets are your form of auto loot in the game and have a ton of different perks, tiers, etc. And thankfully, you do get a bunch from the main quest line nowadays to help you get started, so you don't need to spend basically any money on pets like you used to need to. BDO also does have a very in-depth mount system, different horse tiers, types, skills for the horses, gear for the horses. You can breed horses, you can get dream horses, you can enhance horses. There's a lot to do, and if you could catch horses. And so the horse system and the mount system in game does have quite the depth to it, although horses are obviously going to be the main mount type. The game also does have sailing and open ocean combat as well, so you can explore the open seas fishing, trading, hunting sea monsters, having a crew of your own NPCs, collecting different boat types, and more. So now, with an about out of the way, guys, let's actually get into my pros of the game. Now, the first pro that I personally have is that it is a sandbox. There is a lot of freedom, and it always feels like there is something to do. And something I've learned about myself over the last year and a half, trying a lot of different MMOs, is that I prefer the sandbox feel over a more on-the-rails vertical feel. Because the thing with the sandbox is that everything that you do, you choose to do. You only do the dailies that you want to do. You only do the tasks in game that you choose to do, and you are not forced to do anything that maybe you don't want to do, which I personally really like about sandbox style games, and it is something that BDO does have and does extremely well. BDO also does have very engaging combat. In my opinion, it is one of the best MMO combat systems I have ever experienced. The combat feels fluid, the spell effects and audio feel insanely impactful, and BDO is famed for its combat experience, and that reputation does hold very true. BDO also does have extremely good graphics. They've also added a lot of new graphical settings with AMD FSR to allow lower end PCs to actually be able to run in remastered mode and still have relatively good performance, which I think is a very good thing. BDO also does have an older school MMO feel to it, in my opinion. No fast travel, very engaging professions, needing to drink water in the desert during the day to keep cool and tea at night to keep warm, having to feed your horses, your pets, and your workers, needing to train your character's breath by running to increase your stamina, needing to increase strength by carrying weight. BDO just are needing to increase your character's strength by carrying like a heavy backpack around so that you can carry more stuff. BDO just has a lot of those old school MMO elements to it, and I think a lot of players who are looking for that type of experience will really like it. BDO also does have an improved main quest compared to the way it was in the past. It's vastly improved from its original creation, and the main quest and suggested quest of the Black Spirit, who are basically your guide for the main quest line and act as an interface for certain quest systems, will really help guide you through your early journey and help you learn about the game, the in-game world, level fast, and get a ton of free things along the way. Granted, the story leaves something to be desired, obviously, but it's improved a lot from its previous iterations. BDO also does have traditional side quests that give you like an okay experience if you want to level up to nearly the soft cap by just simply doing quests. You absolutely can do that, so you don't need to feel forced to grind to level early on if you do not want to. And with certain in-game item called the Chenga Tome, if you want to look into that a little bit more, the experience gained from quests is increased by a boatload, allowing you to quest very successfully to level 61. But again, story-wise, the side quests do, in my opinion, leave something to be desired. There are tons of events and free rewards in BDO as well nowadays, and already since I've started playing BDO, like, I've just gotten an obnoxious amount of free things in the game. It's actually like kind of nice, and there's been so many events, and during these events I've been able to get a ton of value and rewards simply by just logging in. Another thing that I like about BDO is that most gear in the game is not bind on pickup, which means that when you are done using a piece of gear, you can actually resell it on the marketplace to recoup some of your original investment. BDO also does have an insanely large class selection. As I mentioned earlier, there are like 24 classes in the game, and most of these classes also do have succession and awakening skill lines, so there's a ton of playstyles to choose from. And even though the classes are gender locked, it's not the end of the world, because oftentimes, you know, a different class is really similar, but one just uses the like a different gender. So like this wizard and witch, who are both extremely similar, but obviously one is male and one is female, you know, so they're really similar. So if you like one class that is male and you want to play the female counterpart, you could do that, or vice versa. Obviously that doesn't apply to all of the classes, but to many that it applies to many. But I do know that gender locking can be a bit of an issue for some people, but you know, again, depending on what class you're looking for, there might be a class of the opposing gender. Now, there is a huge focus on PvP in Black Desert Online. For a lot of people, this can be a con, but for me, it is a pro. Not many of the current big MMOs out there have a huge PvP focus, and in BDO, PvP is a massive part of the game, and combined with the combat system, it makes for a very fun experience. Now, you can always be doing something in BDO as well while AFK. You can set your character up to fish, process items, train breath or strength, gain experience, train horses, and do a bunch of other things while AFK. You could also thankfully minimize the game to your system's tray during that time to reduce the amount of stress that it does put on your PC's resources. However, I will say that in the past, AFK money making was a lot stronger than it is now currently, so do not feel obligated to always leave BDO running or to always have your PC running if you don't want to. I would say that, in my opinion, AFK money making methods definitely have been outpaced by a lot of the active methods. So again, you can leave your PC on and do this stuff in the background if you want to, but do not feel obligated to do so if you do not want to. Another pro that I have for the game is the season servers that I mentioned earlier. Basically, like I said, this is a vehicle for new players to catch up, and it offers accelerated experience gains and tons of rewards. And BDO has also greatly improved the game's catch-up mechanics, making it easier than ever before for a newer player or a returning player to get started in Black Desert. And speaking of which, that segues me into my next pro. Gear progression in Black Desert Online has been heavily improved with the addition of the new guaranteed pen, boss armor, and weapon systems, as well as being able to get one guaranteed pen accessory. BDO's gearing progression was always in the past either saving up a ludicrous amount of silver for your upgrades or braving the not so good RNG enhancement system that I personally very much dislike. However, there are some systems in place now that allow you to get to the highest level of gear enhancement in a much better progression-like fashion that lets you upgrade your Tet armor, which is the second highest level of gear enhancement, progressively over time. And after a certain amount of upgrades, you can turn that into the highly desired pen armor. So you don't have to brave the BS RNG system if you don't want to, nor do you need to save up this ludicrous amount of gold to then see a singular upgrade. And I know for me personally, the addition of the new progressive guaranteed pen system plus the Arena Solaire slated to come out later this year is what personally brought me back to Black Desert Online. Because in BDO in the past, it always felt like you made a lot of progression really quick, and then you ran face first into a brick wall where it felt like your next upgrade was just forever away. But now with the new guaranteed armor and weapon systems, that it adds some much needed medium term progression golds, and the progression curve of the game feels way smoother than it did previously. And for me, this has been one of the biggest improvements to Black Desert since the last time I played. Now, while things have improved and while things are good overall for BDO, the game is obviously not without its cons. Now, my first con is also my first pro, the fact that it's a sandbox. There is a lot of freedom, and it always feels like there's something to do. But for new players, this can feel insanely overwhelming when you have no idea how to do anything. And I know the first week that I played BDO back, a couple of years ago, I logged off every single day with a migraine because of how much information I felt was just being thrown at me, and realizing the gravity behind how many systems and things I would need to work on. Now, this can be mitigated by setting short, medium, and long-term goals for yourself, but there's definitely an overwhelming feeling that comes when you start this game as a new or returning player. Now, performance-wise, this game runs well overall, as well as you've adjusted the graphical settings to your system's capabilities, especially with the new AMD FSR. The game has gotten a lot better. But the biggest performance issue that I've noticed with BDO are two things. Number one, graphical pop-ins, and the second thing being stutters. This can definitely ruin some of your immersion, where people and objects suddenly just pop in on your screen out of nowhere. Or what the other thing that I mentioned with the stutters, if you're just in the middle of grinding or PvPing or something and your game starts to stutter a bit. Now, this can be fixed and worked on a bit if you obviously tune your graphical settings and do some system settings. I do recommend, if you do decide to get into BDO, there's an ultimate performance guide floating around the Black Desert Online Reddit that I would recommend looking into. I know that's made a huge improvement on my game, but these things are just kind of known to be a little bit of an issue with BDO, and especially if you're not running the craziest newest system or something, you are going to have to kind of just keep in mind. Speaking of which, BDO is a very grindy game. Now, some people don't mind the grind, but others do. But you need to keep in mind, Black Desert is a Korean MMO, and if you don't like grinding, you're not going to like Black Desert. Now, my next con is the gear enhancement. The gear enhancement system in this game, similarly to Lost Ark, is very RNG, although in BDO, the failing in enhancement is way more punishing. The fail stacks in this game, aka failure protection system, definitely would require its own video to explain though, but a quick and dirty version is that you, again, similar to Lost Ark, you build failure protection for an item enhancement when you fail to enhance an item, and those stacks get consumed on a successful enhancement. Now, with that being said, it's not like you just build fail stacks and nothing happens to the original item. When you fail to upgrade a piece of gear, the gear can actually downgrade in enhancement value, and in the case of accessories, it can actually be destroyed altogether unless you use cron stones, because there are certain items that can prevent this, but they can be very expensive or just take time to collect. Now, thankfully, this enhancement stuff can be mostly avoided if you start going through the guaranteed pen systems and stuff, or if you just buy gear directly off of traders. But there are times that you do feel you need to enhance, and depending on your RNG, it can be quite annoying. BDO also does not have any traditional trading between players. Most things do need to go through the marketplace, and very few things can be traded directly from player to player. This is to help prevent things like gear boosting, so I get it, but it could definitely be seen as a con for a lot of people. BDO also does have gender locked classes. As explained earlier, that cannot be a huge deal for some classes, but for others, you are completely locked into the gender that that class is. Now, this is a con that I have for the moment, but it's not always going to be one, and that is that there's no low to mid gear queuable PvP. Unfortunately, the only queuable PvP mode has no gear cap, so as a new to medium term player, you're basically limited to tier 1 node wars, because if you do that uncapped PvP, you're just going to get slammed by people with gear. And you can create a trial character to practice in Battle Arena too, though, if you do desire, or you can even take that into that red battlefield battleground type of mode. But I get it. A lot of people, they want to play on their main character, and you're limited to what you can do at the moment. But thankfully, though, the upcoming Arena of Solaire should solve this issue by adding in a gear equalized, queuable PvP that I know I'm extremely excited for. Now, my next con is going to be that there is not a lot of traditional end-game PvE. Now, this isn't the biggest con for me as I'm more of a PvP-oriented player, but I want to mention it here in the cons list because it's going to be a huge turnoff for many people. BDO does not have many traditional end-game dungeons, with only having 2 at the moment. And the game also has no raids. So if you are a fan of that kind of content and that's the main thing you enjoy doing, I personally really wouldn't recommend Black Desert. Now, the big elephant in the room when it comes to BDO is it pay to win? Now, BDO's monetization model is always a hot topic when it comes to the game, and there's a lot of old, outdated, jaded opinions on it, so I'm just going to give you my 2 cents on how I feel about it coming back to the game, and then it's up to you to decide from there whether or not the monetization of this game is something you could tolerate or not. Now, most items that you could purchase from the Pearl shop in this game, which is the game's microtransactions shop, can be bought on the marketplace with in-game silver, similar to Star Wars The Old Republic. So there is a way to buy real money items with in-game currency. Now, BDO does have a very low buy-in price of only $8 to $10 US, and all the content that is released is free with your purchase of the game. So you never have to spend any money on content on a single piece of content ever after you've originally purchased the game. So this means that all the money that you spend in BDO after your initial purchase will be on microtransactions. Now, the Pearl shop does have a lot on it, but there's like really only 2 things in my opinion that are mandatory to spend real money on, which is the campsite that allows for remote repairs at a remote vendor, as well as 1 month of the value pack, which is essentially the game's quote subscription. However, you can place orders from the value pack on the marketplace, so you could always keep a rolling pre-order on this if you do so choose to. Past that, most things that you would want to buy in Black Desert are optional. In the past, you've needed to buy inventory, weight, pets, maids, butlers. It was kind of ridiculous. But nowadays, so much of those things are given for free from login rewards or as part of the main quest line that the amount of money that you need to spend on BDO is way lower than it's been in the past. Like, for example, if you just end the main quest line, like if you finish the main quest line on your character, you end up having 4 out of the 5 pets that you can have to do your auto looting. So you just have to buy 1 off the NP and boom, you're good to go. They've also started giving out weight and inventory exchange coupons too. So if you've played in the past and you've invested money on upgrading a character's weight and inventory, but you don't play that character anymore, you can transfer that to another character. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. Certain things in this game have no business being character specific, like the Celestial Horn, which lets you call your horse from as far as you want to, are character specific, which just kind of annoy me a little bit when it's like, I bought that on my Hashishine and I want to move it to my Nova, but I can't. I have to buy another one, and that's very frustrating. Also, the fairy system in the game is a very important system to interact with. It is horrific for free-to-play players, and it also does suck that fashion inside of the game is basically non-existent outside of the microtransaction outfits. But I personally feel that nowadays, if you consider how much money you'd spend on another MMO, like World of Warcraft, Elder Scrolls Online, etc., and you spend the exact same amount of money inside of Black Desert, you will be spending more than enough to have a perfectly fulfilling experience inside the game. Now, with all of that being said, you can still absolutely whale out in Black Desert. There is no denying that. You can drop a ton of money, buy a ton of costumes, melt them down for Cron Stones, which will allow you to go through that RNG enhancements to try to get those gear upgrades without the risk of your items downgrading. That is still a thing you can do, and in that regards, yes, BDO is paid to win. You can even theoretically sell Pearl Shop items for raw silver and then just purchase your upgrades, but you're looking into a solid six-figure investment to make that happen. However, with the new guaranteed pen system in the game, doing the pay-to-win methods of upgrading your gear is way less valuable and impactful than it was in the past, since the gear curve for what I would call regular players, so us normal people basically, it's way less steep than it was in the past. Now, this might be a bit of a hot take too, but like, most MMOs nowadays have some level of pay to win or pay to convenience or whatever you want to call it in them. So it's up to you, the individual player, to decide where your personal line in the sand is and decide if the monetization that BDO has is something that you can tolerate. And I tried to do a very balanced job at explaining how it is here. So, and again, if you want to look into it more, I do have a Pearl Shop guide on my YouTube channel that you could take a look at and kind of decide, you know, is this going to be okay for you? But it's up to you to decide if the level and type of monetization that BDO has is right for you. Now, guys, with all of that stuff out of the way, the pros, the cons, the talk about pay to win, the about, should you play Black Desert Online? In my opinion, if you're a raider or a dungeon diver, I'm going to have to unfortunately say no. BDO does not really have a lot of traditional dungeons. It's got 2 dungeon things, and you know, there's no raids. So if you are looking for that stereotypical vertical progression type of game, WoW, ESO, Final Fantasy endgame dungeon and raid experience, BDO just doesn't have it, and so it's not going to be the game for you. However, if you are a PvPer, I'd say 100%. BDO's main endgame focus is on PvP, and it'll take you a bit to get to the point where you're geared enough to hop into PvP, especially in the open world. But once you are once you are there, it's an incredibly fun and engaging experience. Tier 1 Node Wars are a great experience for newer players, and it doesn't take as long to get into at all compared to the game's endgame PvP. Like, you can literally get to Tier 1 Node Wars by just playing through a season server. In Tier 1 Node Wars, there are attack power, defense power, and health caps, giving new and returning players more of an equal footing against their opponents. Also, we have the new Arena of Solaire coming out, which is going to add a much needed form of gear equalized queuable PvP that I think a lot of people are really going to like. Also, if you are a solo player, I say absolutely, you can do a lot in Black Desert completely alone, and the game's quests have some okay stories, although again, nothing to write home about. The world design is gorgeous, and it's very easy to get lost in the universe, and personally, I think BDO is a solo player's dream. Crafting, I also am going to have to say 100%. The game has some of the most in-depth crafting of any MMO I've ever played, and it's the only MMO I personally enjoy crafting in. Crafting gets so in-depth in this game that they're literally, like, crafting has its own gearing path separate from combat. Like, there are people that literally only play BDO for the crafting. So it is absolutely something you can do. And especially if you're into like just progression and overall account progression and like, you know, being able to play one game for like a long time, BDO is really good for that as well. Now, if you are super into housing at the moment, I'm going to have to say like it kind of depends. If you want to do housing on top of like the other things I've mentioned here and talked about with BDO, I'd say give the game a go. But if it's going to be like one of the main things that you're going to do, personally, there are, in my opinion, better games to do this in. Now, while I think the mansion system did make some big improvements to the game's in-game housing system, I still think games like ESO and Star Wars The Old Republic just do housing a bit better, and if it's going to be your main thing that you interface with, I'd recommend those games over Black Desert. Just because, again, BDO's housing, it's okay, it's pretty decent, but the other games, in my opinion, just have superior systems. Now, overall, my impression of Black Desert in 2022 is positive, especially compared to years of the past. And I think unless you're a hardcore raider, dungeon diver, or like insanely into housing, I think it's really worth giving BDO a try. My biggest issues with Black Desert in the past were its insanely steep gearing curve and the lack of queuable PvP for undergeared players, as well as how much money you felt that you kind of needed to spend on the microtransaction shop, all of which has either been solved or is in the process of being solved. And you can also get BDO for a very low upfront cost, and there's no harm in giving the game a shot. The game can seem very overwhelming at first, but if you subscribe to my channel, I've been making a ton of beginner guides and new player guides for BDO, and plan on making a lot more in the upcoming months that will help you get started on your adventures in BDO. But guys, before I do head out today, I do just want to give you one piece of advice. If you do get into Black Desert, take it slow. The game is very, very different than traditional Western MMORPGs. There's a ton to do, and a lot of systems to learn and get used to. Take everything one thing at a time. Set short, medium, and long-term goals for yourself and play at your own pace. Don't worry about what other people are doing. And if you do that, I think you're going to really have a great time and enjoy BDO. But if you try to tackle everything at once and just go super hard trying to do everything, I think you're going to be greatly increasing your odds of burning out early. But guys, with that being said, that is going to be it for my Is It Worth Playing BDO in 2022 video. Hopefully this gave you guys a balanced perspective and look at the game, and that you did enjoy the video. What do you guys think about BDO? If you have tried it recently, do you play it? Do you not play it? And why? Let me know in that comment section below. If you guys like this video, I would appreciate a lot if you left a like on it. If you have any questions about Black Desert as well, you can also leave them below. And guys, for, again, a lot more BDO content coming up in the upcoming weeks and months, be sure to hit that sub button as well as the bell to keep those notifications on. So I appreciate you all stopping by today. Thank you all very much. As always, I'm Dottz Gaming, and I'll see you all in the next video.